"You saved me, so now according to the sacred law I must bear you a children," said the Apache woman. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. The air was dry, and the wind whispered softly through the tall, golden grass, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth. John Parker trudged along the uneven path, his boots heavy with dust and his water supply nearly gone. He had been traveling alone for days, searching for a trading post rumored to exist near the edge of the canyon. But now fatigue and hunger pressed down on him, making each step feel heavier than the last. John was no stranger to the hardships of the wilderness. He had grown up on the edge of civilization, learning to ride, hunt, and survive from an early age. Yet nothing had prepared him for the loneliness and danger of traveling alone in Apache territory. Stories of wandering settlers encountering trouble in these lands were common, but he had believed he was careful enough to avoid danger. That belief had been his shield, and now it felt as though that shield was cracking. As he rounded a rocky bend, he heard a sudden rustle behind him. Before he could react, a group of rough-looking men emerged from the shadows. They were bandits, faces weathered and stern, with eyes that showed no mercy. "Well, well, what do we have here?" One of them sneered. "A lone traveler. Looks like easy pickings."
John's heart raced.
He knew he had little chance of fighting them all. Reaching into his satchel, he considered grabbing his knife, but one of the bandits was already advancing toward him. He spread out, cutting off any chance of escape. He had no choice but to drop to the ground, hoping to make himself small and avoid serious injury. But luck was not with him. A heavy blow to his side sent him sprawling into the dust, pain shooting through his ribs. Everything blurred. The sounds of laughter and shouting faded into a distant echo. John felt himself losing strength, his mind teetering on the edge of unconsciousness. The world around him became a haze of shapes and colors, until there was nothing but a cold, unforgiving emptiness. When he opened his eyes again, the sun had moved lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He was no longer in the middle of the trail, but lying on soft earth, covered with a blanket of woven fibers. Pain throbbed in his side, reminding him of the beating he had taken. Slowly, he tried to sit up, only to find strong hands gently pushing him back down. "Stay still," a calm, firm voice said. It was unlike anything he had heard before, soft yet commanding respect. He turned his head weakly and saw her, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and skin kissed by the sun. Her hair was long and black, braided neatly down her back. She looked at him with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Who are you?" John asked, his voice weak. "I am Nantan," she replied. "You are hurt. You must rest." John tried to understand, but words failed him. He wanted to speak, to ask where he was, how he had been found, but his body refused to obey. Nantan carefully lifted him, guiding him toward a small shelter made of wood and animal hides. Inside, the air was warm, scented with smoke and herbs. She laid him on a bed of soft blankets, tending to his wounds with practiced hands. As she cleaned the cuts on his arms and bandaged the bruises on his ribs, John watched her work silently.
There was a strange grace in the way she moved, a quiet strength that seemed almost otherworldly. Despite the pain, he felt a sense of relief.
Somehow he knew he was safe in her care. "You were lucky," Nantan said softly, glancing at him. "The desert is not kind to the weak or the careless."
I don't know how I survived," John admitted. "They could have killed me easily."
"They would have," Nantan said, "but the spirits guided me to you." Perhaps it was meant to be. John tried to speak again, but his voice faltered. The truth of her words sank into him. He had been saved, not by chance, but by her presence, by her courage and skill. Been desperate. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. Over the next few days, John remained in the small shelter, slowly regaining his strength. Nantan brought him food, dried meat, roasted corn, and fresh water. She taught him how to drink carefully, how to rest without straining his injuries. He watched her move through the village, interacting with others with respect and authority. It was clear she was valued, trusted, and feared in equal measure. Narration. During this time, John also began to learn about the traditions of the Apache people. Nantan spoke carefully, explaining their laws, their ways of life, and the sacred customs that guided every decision. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she sat beside him and spoke words that would change his life forever. "You saved me once with your courage and presence," she said. "Now, according to the sacred law, I must bear you a child."
John blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. His mind raced, trying to understand the weight of her statement.
"A child?" he repeated. "Yes," Nantan said, her voice steady. "It is our law. A life given in protection creates a bond."
You have survived because of me, and now that bond requires fulfillment.
It is not just about us. It is about respect, tradition, and balance. John felt a swirl of emotions: shock, confusion, fear, and curiosity. Do you know what to address people? What happened in his life arose into his mess. What she had been undertaken to Nansan's eyes.
Yeah, as he looked into Nantan's eyes, he saw sincerity and resolve.
Breaths. She was not making a demand out of whim. She was honoring her people, her culture, and the sacred rules that had guided generations. In the days that followed, John struggled to come to terms with his new reality. He wanted to leave, to return to the life he knew. But something inside him kept him there. Perhaps it was gratitude, or perhaps it was the respect he had grown to feel for Nantan and her people. Slowly, he began to understand that survival was more than just avoiding death. It was about learning, adapting, and honoring the bonds that life placed upon him. He spent his time helping Nantan and the villagers, assisting with chores, gathering firewood, and learning to navigate the rugged landscape.
Each task brought him closer to understanding the rhythm of their lives, the careful balance between nature and survival.
And with every passing day, he saw the depth of Nantan's strength. Not just physical, but moral and spiritual. She carried herself with dignity, wisdom, and unwavering faith in the sacred law.
By the end of the week, John had regained enough strength to walk unassisted.
He no longer felt like a helpless outsider, but as someone slowly becoming part of a larger story. One that was written not just by his choices, but by the traditions and beliefs of the people who had saved him. Raptishat, which had once seemed harsh and unforgiving, was now a place of life, guidance, and unexpected connection. As the sun rose on the 8th day, John stood outside the small shelter, feeling the warmth on his face and the wind against his skin. Nantan approached him, carrying a basket of fresh herbs. She smiled gently, a mix of pride and expectation in her expression. You are stronger now," she said. "And soon you must decide how you will honor the bond that has been created." John looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that survival was not just about living. It was about accepting responsibility, understanding other ways of life, and embracing the connections that destiny had placed before him. For the first time since he had wandered into the desert, John felt a sense of purpose. He had been saved, yes, but more than that, he had been given a chance to learn, to grow, and to become part of something greater than himself. And as he gazed at Nantan, standing strong and unwavering, he knew that his journey was only just beginning. The desert stretched endlessly before them, golden and unforgiving, yet full of promise. John understood now that life was fragile, but bonds, whether created by law, gratitude, or courage, were stronger than any hardship. And in the quiet of that early morning, with the wind rustling through the grass and the sun rising over the horizon, he felt a deep, unspoken connection to the woman who had saved him, and to the sacred law that now bound their fates together.
After his recovery, John began to live within the rhythm of the Apache village. The mornings were filled with activity.
Smoke rose from small fires as villagers prepared food. Children ran barefoot across the dusty paths, and men and women moved with practiced purpose, tending to their daily duties. John watched closely, trying to understand the unspoken rules of life here. Every action seemed deliberate, every gesture carrying meaning beyond the surface. Nantan guided him patiently. She taught him how to fetch water from the nearby stream without disturbing the fragile ecosystem, how to recognize edible plants, and how to avoid the hidden dangers of the desert. "The land gives life," she said one morning as they walked along a narrow trail. "But it also teaches respect. If you ignore its lessons, it will take more than it gives." John tried to absorb her lessons, though he often struggled. The ways of the village were unlike anything he had known. He had grown up on a farm where life moved according to the sun and seasons. But here, every action was connected to a deeper purpose. Hunting was not just for food. It was a ritual of skill, patience, and gratitude. Gathering herbs was not merely for medicine. It was a practice in observing balance and harmony. At first, John's clumsy attempts caused quiet smiles or polite nods from the villagers, but he persisted. The children were curious about him. They had never seen an outsider who stayed rather than passing through. At first they approached with caution, whispering among themselves. But soon their curiosity turned into fascination. They followed John as he learned to track small animals or climb rocks, imitating his every move with boundless energy. John laughed more than he had in months, feeling the warmth of human connection he had almost forgotten in his solitude. Despite these moments of lightness, John could not ignore the tension that lingered beneath the surface. The villagers were polite, yet some cast wary glances his way. He could sense skepticism, a quiet questioning of whether he truly understood the sacred law that now linked him to Nantan.
Some of the elders would watch him from a distance during their council meetings, their eyes calculating, judging.
He knew he had to prove himself, not just through words, but through actions. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant mountains, a scout arrived at the village. He brought alarming news. A group of rival settlers was approaching, seeking to claim the land and resources near the Apache territory. The villagers gathered quickly, forming a council under the shade of the largest mesquite tree. Tension hung heavy in the air. Nantan took her place among the elders, her presence commanding attention. John stood at the edge of the circle, unsure of his role but determined to help. "We must prepare," Nantan said. "They are few, but their intentions are dangerous. We cannot allow them to take what our people have protected for generations." He did not yet understand all the traditions or the strategies the villagers used, but he knew he had to contribute. He offered to help set traps, gather firewood, and fortify the village's perimeters. Nantan watched him closely, her eyes measuring his commitment. She could see that he was sincere, willing to step into a world he had barely begun to understand. Over the next few days, John worked tirelessly. He learned to move silently across the desert, to predict the paths of animals and humans alike. He helped construct barriers using thorny branches and hidden pits, all designed to protect the village without causing unnecessary harm. Each day, his respect for the Apache people deepened. He began to understand that their strength did not come solely from skill with weapons or knowledge of the land, but from a deep sense of responsibility to one another. and to the traditions that had sustained them. During this time, John and Nantan spent more hours together discussing life, survival, and the meaning of the sacred law.
Our law is not meant to trap or control, Nantan explained one quiet evening as they sat by the fire.
It is meant to honor the bonds created by life and death. By giving and saving, you were given back to life, and now there is a bond that cannot be ignored. But it is not punishment. It is a trust, a responsibility.
John listened intently.
He began to see the depth of the law, the way it shaped relationships and maintained harmony within the tribe. It was not about forcing affection or obedience. It was about acknowledging debts of life, respect, and honor. He glances around in desperate. Slowly, he began to accept the reality that had once terrified him. The day the settlers arrived, John was ready. Hidden behind rocks and low brush, he observed their approach, noting their movements and numbers. Nantan and the villagers moved with quiet efficiency, using strategies that John had helped prepare. The settlers underestimated the Apache knowledge of the land. Every step they took led them into carefully arranged obstacles, pits, and distractions. John's heart pounded as he watched the confrontation unfold, amazed by the precision and coordination of Nantan's people, Brasking. By the end of the day, the settlers retreated, frustrated and defeated. The village had been defended without unnecessary violence, a testament to the skill, wisdom, and restraint of its people. John felt a surge of pride, not only for his own contribution but for the courage and intelligence of those who had saved him and now allowed him to become part of their lives. That night, the village celebrated quietly. There was singing and storytelling, and the warmth of a shared meal. John felt more included than ever before. Nantan approached him with a gentle smile. "You have done well," she said. "Not just in defense, but in understanding. You are learning what it means to honor our ways." John smiled back, feeling a sense of belonging he had never known. Yet, he also felt the weight of the sacred law. The bond between him and Nantan was no longer theoretical. It had been tested and strengthened. He knew that he could not ignore it, no matter how foreign it seemed to his former life.
In the days that followed, John continued to learn and integrate himself into village life. He accompanied hunters on long journeys, observing the delicate balance between predator and prey, between taking and giving.
He helped gather herbs with Nantan, listening to her explanations of their medicinal properties and the spiritual significance of each plant. Each lesson deepened his understanding of the interconnectedness of life, and each success strengthened the mutual respect between him and Nantan. Children continued to follow him, laughing and asking questions, and John found joy in teaching them small skills he had learned from his own upbringing. He realized that knowledge was not just for survival. It was a bridge between people, a way to connect hearts and minds. One afternoon, as they rested beneath the shade of a wide cottonwood tree, Nantan spoke again of the bond that tied them together.
"You see now, John, that life is not just about yourself," she said.
"It is about the people you touch, the laws you honor, and the responsibilities you accept. The bond between us is sacred, but it is not a burden. It is a chance to grow, to learn, and to become part of something larger than yourself." John nodded thoughtfully. He had come into the desert seeking trade, adventure, and survival, but he had found something far deeper. He had found connection, respect, and a new understanding of life. And while the sacred law still loomed as a responsibility, it no longer seemed frightening. Instead, it felt like a path, one he could walk with honesty, courage, and care. Over the following weeks, John continued to adapt to the rhythms of the village. He learned to wake with the sun, to move silently through the desert, and to listen to the subtle signals of nature. He became more attuned to the needs of the people around him, offering help without hesitation and observing the unspoken rules that governed every interaction.
At night, He and Nantan would sit by the fire, talking quietly as the stars shimmered above.
She shared stories of her ancestors, of the trials and triumphs that had shaped her people. John listened, realizing that he was not just learning survival skills. He was learning history, culture, and the meaning of honor. One evening, as a cool breeze swept across the village, John looked at Nantan and realized how much he had changed. He was no longer a lost traveler, unsure of his place in the world. He was part of something larger, connected to people, land, and traditions that had endured for generations. And he understood that the bond they shared, created by life and sustained by respect, was a privilege as much as a responsibility. The desert, which had once seemed vast, empty, and threatening, now felt alive with possibility. John had discovered that strength was not just in survival, but in trust, understanding, and commitment. And as he watched Nantan move gracefully among the villagers, he knew that he had entered a world far richer than he could have imagined. A world where courage, respect, and sacred law shaped not just life, but legacy. The months passed, and John found himself growing stronger, wiser, and more at home in the Apache village. The harsh desert, which had once seemed cruel and unforgiving, had become a place of learning, challenge, and quiet beauty. He had learned to respect its hidden dangers, to find food and water where none seemed to exist, and to move through the landscape with care and skill. Yet, it was not only the land that shaped him. It was the people, especially Nantan, who guided him with patience, wisdom, and quiet strength. By now, John's presence was no longer a novelty to the villagers. They had come to trust him, to appreciate his willingness to learn, and to recognize his growing understanding of their ways. He helped in the fields, assisted in hunting, and learned to make simple tools and repairs. But most importantly, he learned to observe and respect the unspoken rules that governed daily life. Every action mattered. Every decision carried weight. Nantan watched him closely, often silently, assessing not only his abilities, but his intentions. She could see that he had begun to grasp the meaning behind the sacred law that bound them. It was no longer a distant, abstract rule. It was something living, shaping the choices he made every day. He no longer acted out of fear or obligation, but out of respect for the people who had saved him, and for the bond he shared with her. One afternoon, while walking along a narrow canyon path, Nantan paused and gestured for John to stop. The sun was high, beating down on the desert floor, and the air shimmered with heat.
"You have come far,"
she said softly.
"But there is still much you do not understand. True strength comes not from knowing the land, but from knowing yourself, and from knowing the people who trust you."
John nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He had learned to hunt, to gather, to move silently, and to aid the villagers in practical ways. Yet he knew that survival alone was not enough. He had to understand the emotions, fears, and hopes of the people who had taken him in, or he would remain an outsider in their eyes. Over the next several weeks, a challenge arose that would test John's understanding in a way he had not anticipated. A severe drought struck the region. The streams that had once provided water for the village slowed to a trickle, and the vegetation that sustained the animals withered under the relentless sun. The villagers worked tirelessly to conserve water and gather what little food remained, but anxiety grew. John, though still learning, offered to help. He explored further into the desert, searching for hidden springs and pockets of life that might sustain the village. He moved quietly, observing the land, listening to its subtle signals, and learning to trust his instincts. When he returned with small containers of water and edible plants, the villagers were grateful, but more than that, they were impressed by his growing ability to understand the delicate balance of the desert. During this time, John and Nantan spent long hours together, discussing the challenges of leadership, survival, and trust. She taught him that every decision had consequences, not just for the individual, but for the entire community. A leader, she said one evening, is someone who carries the weight of others in their heart. You cannot act selfishly or out of fear. You must see the world as it truly is and act with courage and wisdom. John listened carefully, realizing that these lessons applied not only to survival but to the sacred bond between him and Nantan. The bond was more than a law. It was a relationship built on trust, respect, and shared responsibility. It was not something he could ignore or take lightly. The more he understood, the more he felt the weight and importance of the commitment he had accepted. As the drought continued, tension began to rise in the region. Nearby tribes faced similar hardships, and some sought resources that were scarce. One day, a small group approached the village cautiously. They were not hostile, but their intentions were clear. They needed food and water, and they hoped to negotiate. Nantan called a council, inviting John to observe and participate. He watched as she spoke with calm authority, listening to the stranger's needs and offering help while maintaining the village's security. John realized a negotiation required more than words. It required empathy, patience, and a deep understanding of human nature. He began to contribute, offering suggestions based on his knowledge of nearby resources, and the elders welcomed his input. Through these experiences, John began to see Nantan in a new light. Her strength was not only in her skill with the land or her courage in battle, but in her ability to guide, teach, and protect her people with wisdom and compassion. He admired her deeply, and over time, his admiration grew into a quiet affection. He understood now that the bond the sacred law had created was not only about duty, but about the possibility of connection, trust, and love. One evening, as the village gathered around the fire after a long day of work, Nantan spoke to John privately. "You have done well," she said. "You are learning to honor the bond between us. But understanding it is only the first step. You must also choose to accept it fully, with your heart as well as your mind." John felt a mixture of fear and hope. He had faced danger, illness, and the challenges of the desert, yet this moment felt even more important. It was a test not of strength or skill, but of courage in a different sense. The courage to commit, to trust, and to embrace the life he had been given. Over the next several days, John reflected deeply. He thought about the life he had known before the desert, the hardships he had faced, and the people who had shaped him along the way. He realized that he no longer wished to return to his old life unchanged. He had grown, learned, and been transformed by the land, the people, and Nantan's guidance. Finally, one morning, as the first light of dawn painted the desert in soft shades of gold and pink, John approached Nantan. He found her tending to the small garden near the village's edge, her movements calm and purposeful. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Nantan," he said softly, "I have thought about what you told me. I understand the bond, and I want to honor it. Not because I must, but because I choose to. You saved me, the village welcomed me, and I have learned more than I ever imagined. Patience. I want to be part of this life, with you, with your people, and with the land we share." Nantan looked at him, her expression gentle but serious.
"Words are important," she said, "but actions are stronger. You must continue to show respect, courage, and understanding.
Then the bond will not only be law, it will be life." From that day forward, John fully embraced his role in the village. He worked alongside the people, learned their ceremonies, and participated in their rituals with sincerity. He hunted and gathered with care, always mindful of the balance between taking and giving. He helped children learn, advised the elders when appropriate, and supported Nantan in every way he could. As the months passed, the bond between John and Nantan grew stronger. It was not a sudden passionate love, but a steady, deep connection built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that life was fragile and precious. They relied on one another, learned from one another, and celebrated the small joys of each day together. The laughter of children, the taste of fresh food, the beauty of a desert sunrise. One day, a messenger arrived from a nearby settlement with news that the drought was easing and trade routes were reopening. The villagers celebrated, knowing that food and resources would soon become more plentiful. John felt a quiet pride, not only because he had contributed to the village's survival, but because he had become part of a community that valued trust, courage, and honor above all else. That evening, as the fire crackled and the stars emerged overhead, John and Nantan sat together in silence. The bond between them, once a mysterious and foreign law, had grown into a living, breathing connection. John felt gratitude, not only for his life which he had saved, but for the lessons, experiences, and love he had found in the desert. "You have changed," Nantan said softly. "Breaths, not only in skill but in heart. You honor the bond, and you honor our people. That is true strength." John looked at her, feeling a deep sense of peace. "And you have taught me everything," he replied. "I am not the man who stumbled into the desert months ago. I am part of something larger now, because of you, because of the village, because of this life." Nantan nodded. She reached out and placed her hand over his, a gesture of trust and recognition. "Then we move forward together," she said. "Not as master and student, or law and obligation, but as partners, as people bound by respect, courage, and care." That is the true meaning of the sacred law. And so, John and Nantan continued their lives side by side. The desert, once a place of danger and uncertainty, had become a home of learning, connection, and quiet joy. The villagers, once cautious of the outsider, had come to accept him as one of their own. And John, who had wandered into the wilderness seeking survival, had discovered something far greater, a life filled with purpose, respect, and the enduring power of a bond created by courage, gratitude, and love. The seasons changed, and with them came a quiet sense of balance to the desert and the village. John had fully settled into life among the Apache people. He woke with the sun each day, helping where he was needed, learning more about the land and its secrets, and walking beside Nantan as they tended to the village together. What had once felt foreign and overwhelming had become familiar, even comforting. He no longer viewed the desert as a place of danger, but as a teacher, a guide that shaped every moment of life. Nantan, too, carried herself with the same calm authority, but now she and John were partners in more than just survival. Their shared experiences, the dangers, the lessons, the long days of work, had built a connection stronger than either could have imagined. The sacred law, once a distant concept that had frightened John, had grown into something living, a mutual respect and understanding that shaped their thoughts, decisions, and actions. The village had recovered from the drought and the people were thriving once more. Crops were planted and tended with care. Children played freely under the sun, and the elders oversaw daily life with steady guidance.
John had become a trusted member of the community.
He helped in the fields, assisted hunters in planning their routes, and even shared small lessons from his own past, teaching the children about reading, counting, and stories from beyond the mountains. The villagers appreciated his efforts, and slowly their initial skepticism gave way to acceptance and friendship. One evening, as the sky glowed with shades of gold and purple, Nantan approached John with a gentle but serious expression. "The bond between us has grown strong," she said softly. "But life asks for more than understanding. It asks for action. The sacred law is not just words. It is living. And it is time to honor it fully." John felt a mixture of anticipation, humility, and quiet joy. He had come to love and respect Nantan deeply, and the idea of fully embracing the bond was no longer daunting. Instead, it felt like a natural next step, a way to solidify their connection and ensure the continuity of life, tradition, and respect. The days that followed were filled with preparation. John learned the rituals, the ceremonies, and the practices associated with honoring the sacred law. Nantan guided him through each step with patience, explaining not only the actions but the meaning behind them. The bond was not a matter of ownership or control. It was a shared responsibility, a commitment to life, respect, and care. John listened carefully, absorbing every detail, and approached the tasks with sincerity. The villagers, once cautious, now watched with quiet approval.
They had witnessed John's growth, his commitment to learning, and his respect for their customs.
Some offered guidance, others shared stories and songs that had been passed down for generations. Every action, every word, was a reminder of the continuity of life, the importance of tradition, and the bonds that tied the community together. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted the desert in soft pink and gold, Nantan and John stood together before the elders. The ceremony was simple, yet profound. The elders spoke of life, responsibility, and the sacred bond created through protection, respect, and trust. John felt the weight of the moment deeply. He understood that this was not only about him and Nantan. It was about honoring generations of customs, the continuity of the community, and the responsibilities that life had placed upon him. When the ceremony concluded, Nantan and John exchanged a quiet but meaningful gesture of commitment. It was not flashy or dramatic, but the simplicity made it all the more profound. They were no longer merely connected by circumstance. They were connected by choice, respect, and shared understanding. John felt a sense of peace he had never known, a certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. In the months that followed, life in the village continued with its usual rhythm. John and Nantan worked side by side, raising the younger children, tending to the crops, and preparing the community for the challenges of the desert. The bond between them deepened, strengthened not only by shared tasks but by the quiet moments. Watching the sun rise over the horizon, sharing stories by the fire, and listening to the wind whisper through the canyons. Then, one spring morning, Nantan shared news that would bring both joy and a profound sense of responsibility. She was expecting a child. Great. John felt a rush of emotions, excitement, gratitude, and humility. The sacred law had been fulfilled in a way that neither could have forced or predicted. This child would symbolize the bond between them, the continuation of life, and the blending of lessons from two different worlds, his and hers. The elders offered guidance, the women shared their knowledge of childbirth and care, and even the children contributed in small ways, eager to help and to witness the new life that would join them. John was humbled by the support, realizing that the sacred bond extended beyond him and Nantan. It connected the entire community. As the months passed and the child grew within Nantan, John remained devoted to her and to the preparations for the baby. He learned to gather medicinal herbs, to create safe and comfortable spaces, and to participate fully in every aspect of village life. The anticipation of new life brought the community together in ways that reminded John of the importance of connection, tradition, and responsibility. When the child was finally born, the village gathered to celebrate. The baby was healthy, strong, and calm, as if understanding the significance of the moment. Nantan held the child close, her eyes reflecting both pride and serenity. Breath. John stood beside her, overwhelmed with emotion, realizing that he had not only survived the desert, but had become part of a living legacy. The child represented more than their bond. It symbolized the merging of lives, cultures, and experiences. John knew that his journey into the desert had begun as a quest for survival, but it had led him to something far greater: family, community, and a life filled with purpose. The sacred law, once a daunting obligation, had become a source of connection, pride, and joy. In the years that followed, John and Nantan raised their child with care. teaching the lessons of the land, the importance of respect, and the value of courage. John continued to learn from Nantan and the elders, never taking for granted the knowledge, wisdom, and traditions that had welcomed him into their world. He became a mentor to other travelers and young villagers, sharing the lessons he had learned about humility, respect, and the power of connection. The village thrived. The desert, with its harsh sun and unpredictable winds, remained a place of challenge, but also of beauty and growth. John often stood at the edge of the plains, looking out at the mountains and the valleys beyond, feeling a profound gratitude for the path that had led him here. Every moment of struggle, every lesson learned, had brought him to this place of understanding, responsibility, and peace. Nantan remained the center of wisdom in the village, guiding her people with strength, patience, and compassion. John stood beside her, not as a follower, but as an equal partner, contributing to the community in every way he could. Together they taught their child the values of courage, respect, and harmony with the land. They showed how the sacred law, far from being a constraint, could shape a life of purpose, connection, and fulfillment. One quiet evening, as the stars appeared over the desert, John reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the moment he had been lost, injured, and alone. He remembered Nantan's calm presence, the warmth of the village, and the lessons he had learned from both the people and the land. And he realized that life, with all its challenges, had led him to a place far richer than he could have imagined. The bond that had once seemed mysterious and binding had become a living, breathing connection. It was a relationship built on respect, courage, and shared responsibility. It was a family, a community, and a home. John knew that he would never forget the lessons of the desert, the wisdom of Nantan, or the meaning of the sacred law that had changed his life forever. As the years passed, the child grew strong and curious, learning to run across the plains, gather food, and observe the land with wonder. John and Nantan guided them, teaching not only skills but the values that had sustained their people for generations. The child became a living bridge between worlds, a symbol of connection, respect, and the enduring power of trust and care. John often thought of the journey that had begun with danger, isolation, and fear. He realized that every challenge, every moment of doubt had prepared him for this life. The sacred law had not been a burden but a path, guiding him toward understanding, love, and a true sense of belonging. In the quiet of the desert night, with the wind whispering through the grass and the stars shining overhead, John and Nantan sat together, watching their child sleep peacefully. The world around them was vast and sometimes harsh, but within their community, within their bond, there was safety, understanding, and life. They had honored the law, embraced the challenges, and built a legacy that would endure for generations. John understood now that survival was only the beginning. Life was about connection, responsibility, and respect. It was about honoring the bonds created by courage, gratitude, and care. And as he looked at Nantan and at the child who carried the promise of the future, he felt a deep, unshakable sense of fulfillment. The desert, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a home filled with laughter, learning, and life. John knew that he had not only survived, he had thrived, grown, and become part of something far greater than himself. Prize. And the sacred law, which had once seemed so daunting, had guided him to a life of love, respect, and enduring connection.